Hi, and welcome to my channel, Laura's Library Card. It has been a minute since I've said that. I kind of took most of the month of October off from making content. Just trying to figure out a little bit about how I want to make content and how I want to proceed on this channel. So still figuring that out, but welcome back, I guess, question mark. And don't be too surprised if some of my content kind of changes a little bit going forward as I kind of navigate figuring all that out. But I wanted to do a September wrap up just to have for posterity's sake and before I forget everything that I remember about all these books. So yeah, let's just dive right into my September wrap up. In the month of September, I finished 11 titles. 3 of them were digital, 7 of them audio, and 1 physical. My average rating was a 3.8, and total pages read was 3,622 by my calculations. So I had kind of a heavy month in August in reading, and so I definitely had a little bit of a slump the first week of September. But the first title that I finished in September was a book club choice, one of my real life book clubs. And that title is We Are All Completely Beside Ourselves by Karen Joy Fowler. I listened to this on audiobook. I felt that the reading experience went pretty quickly. And basically this book follows Rosemary, and she's talking about her life and especially her childhood and her formative years and her family and sort of what happened in her life. Her brother is like an animal, he left the family as soon as he possibly could at the end of high school and has kind of been MIA for years, and he turned out to be a strong animal rights advocate and is kind of wanted for criminal activity along those same lines. And then the other sort of main element is, I'm going to go ahead and say it here, even though I sort of personally consider it to be a spoiler, but it's in the blurb of the book. And I was very frustrated about that because the book is definitely constructed for you not to know this important piece of information until 25 to 30% of the way through. But that information is in the blurb. And so I felt like that takes away from it. But here it is. The main character Rosemary is talking about her sister, who you then at 30% of the book, it is revealed that the sister is actually a chimpanzee that the family was raising. And so that's the reveal, but that information is in the blurb. So anywho, so basically I was frustrated with that reveal because the main character, the narrator, wants you to view her sister as her sister, how she grew up with this chimpanzee side by side, and they were her parents or at least her father in the book is a psychology researcher, and so he is kind of running these experiments between these two, his daughter and his chimpanzee that he's raising as a daughter, to sort of compare and contrast the two, which I found very interesting. To me, this book was not amazing to listen to and to read along with, but the amazing part was the discussion that we had in our book club, because there was a lot of really interesting discussion about sort of philosophy and personhood and psychology of humans, and what does it mean to be thinking, and what kind of higher function counts as human thinking versus not human thinking. And I found all of those discussions super interesting. It's kind of right up my field. I was a genetics, neuroscience, and psychology major in school, so this was really great about that. I felt the book itself was not an amazing read, and I think it would have really been me, pretty middle of the road, if I had not had that book club discussion to help support and make me further think about that book. But I really enjoyed the discussion part. And my last comment is that I felt that the book really took not a sharp left turn, but it had a very strong animal rights activism message in the last third. It was very back heavy in that way, where you just kind of leave the book and you're okay, I get it, lab animals, ew, bad news. So yes, I enjoyed this reading experience because of the book club discussion, but I did, I guess, like the book better after that discussion part. So there you go. The next book that I finished in September was Scarlet by Marissa Meyer. This is the second book in the Lunar Chronicles series. I listened to this on audio, and we are following our main character of Scarlet, and she has her own kind of plot line that's sort of the whole book is inspired where Scarlet is Red Riding Hood. So her grandmother's missing and she's trying to look for her grandmother, and she teams up with Wolf, who's going to help her in this mission. And so we do continue Cinder's plotline from the first book, and then eventually the two plot lines intersect. So I enjoyed this book. It's definitely full of sort of like adventure and like kind of like tripping right along. I like that there were the two points of view, and I kept kind of trying to figure out how these two stories would eventually intersect. I thought it was very interesting to see Cinder kind of struggling with morality issues in this book as she starts to figure out and use her mind powers. Overall, like, this was a sort of predictable YA fantasy romance, but also like I enjoyed it. It's a fun, entertaining read, and I got all the expectations. Like, my expectations were exceeded for the bar that I had in my head for like a YA fantasy romance, which, you know, is not really my favorite genre. But I was a little... Scarlet is kind of... She's very fiery and like hot-blooded, and sometimes that kind of came across as like pig-headed, and I had to remind myself that most of the main characters in these books are teenagers, and I felt like the romance plotline in this story was kind of pretty weak. It was very like insta-love fated mates kind of situation, and I just wanted more from that. So I hope that kind of continues to be developed as the series goes on, though I have at this point finished the third book, and that's not really happening. But anyway, like, it's still fun. So I finished both of those books like the first 2 days of September, and then I could not get into anything else right away. Nothing was like pushing my buttons and like making me really want to dive into it. So I reached for a tried and true favorite, which was Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. This is a reread. I listened to it on audiobook, and I think this is the third time that I've read it, and this book, I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. It's really legitimately one of my all-time favorite books at this point. We follow Alex and Henry. This is a male-male romance. I'd say it's like new adult age genre group demographic, and it's sort of a enemies to friends to lovers, and for me, it's an all-time favorite read. I love it. The narrator does an amazing job. I've listened to it on audiobook all 3 times that I've read it, and I just think that he does a really great job. And to me, it's really so fun. It's just really it's my favorite. I'm blabbering and blubbering, but the pacing is great. The tension is great. The banter is great. There is really great emotional development between the relationship, which is what I want in my romance. And I really like the element of the politics. It's there enough to support the story, but not like detract from the romance. And I just had all of the feels while I listened. And I wondered if my experience would be a little bit lesser because this was my third time through, and I did not feel that way. I still had all the feels, and it was just such a fun time. And so this is officially a 6-star, so glad I've read it. Probably will reread every 2 or 3 years, indefinitely into the future. The next 3 books that I finished in September were all part of the Ice Planet Barbarians series. I feel like the numbering of the books of the series gets kind of wonky because there's like a weird holiday book. So I call these number 7, 8, and 9, but like I don't think that those match up with the Goodreads number of series, but whatever. The first book that I finished as part of this series was Barbarian's Touch. All of these books are by Ruby Dixon. And so in Barbarian's Touch, we follow Lila and Rokan. Lila is deaf, and she understandably is quite freaked out when she wakes up on this foreign planet, and she had a cochlear implant on Earth, but that is not with her on this planet, so she cannot hear. She's 100% deaf, and she is thankfully there with her sister who does sign, but she cannot hear or communicate with anybody else on this planet. So all of the males who are yet to be mated are definitely interested in these two newcomers, and Hassan like steals Lila away, and so that just makes Lila miserable. And so Rakan, our main male love interest, he has to like go and like save her from Hassan, and then he is determined to learn, you know, to sign to her so they can communicate. I like that this was inclusive in having a deaf character. I don't know what, like, I cannot speak to its like proper, true representation because that's not my lived experience, but I thought it was pretty interesting. She teaches the like computer on this planet, the ship, all of the ASL she knows in like 2 days so that other people can like download the ASL language. And I was like, okay, sure, whatever. But Rokan was definitely a cinnamon roll. He was so incredibly patient throughout this book. And also he had this like psychic sixth sense sort of thing going on, which I thought was a really interesting element and not something we've seen in the series. And so I thought that element was really cool. And yeah, I was pleased with Lila's growth over the story. She started off very like weepy and whiny and scared, and then as she gained more confidence and some independence, she grew a lot stronger and like sort of no longer was like, where's my sister? Oh, by the end. So I really appreciated her character growth. So the next book that I finished was Barbarian's Taming by Ruby Dixon, where we follow Lila's sister Maddie. So Maddie is she's plus size. She also like she's kind of like has like a more abrasive personality, and so she has rubbed people the wrong way like from the get-go, and she is pleased that her sister Lila has like gained some newfound confidence and independence, but also Maddie now feels like a little like left behind, or she's kind of having some weird feelings about that. And so she actually starts a friends with benefits relationship with the guy Hassan, which I thought was kind of interesting because like Hassan in Lila's book is really like sort of painted as the bad guy and like kind of immature, and like even in this book like so to then turn around and be like, okay, now he's supposed to be like the big brawny hero, it was like a little bit of an adjustment for me. But I liked the fact that they were trying to do this like friends with benefits situation because we haven't really seen that in any of the other books in this series so far, so I thought that was interesting. And there is not an immediate like resonance between the two of them, so I thought that was kind of an interesting element. And then there is an event that happens like 2/3 of the way through this book that affects everybody on this planet, and I don't want to like spoil that, but that definitely felt like a turning point in the series as a whole, and definitely functioned as a turning point in this book because we got to see Hassan sort of rise to the top and be a good guy and really kind of like save the day to some extent. So yeah, I liked the fat rep that was here. I think that the author did a good job making Maddie a semi-unlikable character because that was how she felt like everyone viewed her. So I thought that was done pretty well. And then again, I thought that Hassan was like kind of still immature, and he's just not been my favorite hero. But I am pleased with this book in the installation. And then the third book that I read as part of the I Explained It Barbarians series is Barbarian's Heart by Ruby Dixon. And in this one, the whole cave and the whole group of this, all the people on this planet are like reacting to this event that had happened in Maddie's book. And so the main male character in this book actually has amnesia. And so what's interesting is that we're following an established couple. These two met when all the girls first arrived on this planet, and Stacy mated our main male character, Pashov, and they've been together, they've been happy, they've been in love, they have a son, I think, and he has amnesia throughout this, at the start of this book. And so they are strangers, even though they are like married and have an established family. And so they're trying to kind of figure out how to go forward because she still feels all this love for him and he feels all this obligation toward her and his offspring, but he has no memory of her or his child. So I thought that was, I thought this amnesia trope was done pretty well for me. I felt like it was very interesting to have Stacy be a sort of homebody. a lot of the other female characters have been like strong and spunky and I want to be independent. I want to like do my own hunting and do my own, like strike out on my own. And Stacy's like, nope, I'm cool with like staying in the cave and like cooking people food and raising my baby and making love to my dude. So I just really enjoyed that sort of personality being presented, and I thought the amnesia part was done well. I thought it was interesting to have this established couple. It was really frustrating and annoying to me that they were constantly both wishing that like, or Stacy in particular, she kept wishing that he would just like revert, if things could just go back the way they were. And like it takes so long of the book before finally they kind of both separately come to the realization that like they can't ever reclaim what used to be, and that like instead they should probably try to like forge new connections and like make things work going forward. And I'm like, no shit. So that part was kind of annoying to me, that they kept trying to be like revert back to some previous state when, instead of trying to like move forward together. But like I really enjoyed how that book was resolved. And there has been in the last couple of books a sort of subplot with the Metlax, which are like non-intelligent life forms, or like, you know, sort of like the gorilla equivalent on this planet. And I think that that's going to play a bigger role going forward. So I'm just kind of like fingers crossed that that is true, because I'm finding those interactions with the Metlax very interesting. The next book that I finished in September was The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. This is by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This was the only book that I read physically this month, for the month of September, and I read this for a book club, and I did a book review sort of vlog video, which I will link up in the cards and down in the description. I read this aloud to my husband, and the quick premise is that Monique is an investigative journalist who has been asked by Evelyn Hugo to kind of write to hear her life story and write her memoir. Even though Monique like doesn't know Evelyn Hugo, and Evelyn Hugo is this ultra mega famous Hollywood starlet from years ago, and now she's 80 years old. I thought this book was interesting and good. I think that it had good LGBT representation. I thought it was, the star of the show is very clearly Evelyn Hugo herself. I thought that she was so intriguing. She's very well like layered. She does, she makes no secret that she made choices that were manipulative and or like considered catty, or considered like, she considers that she like betrayed people, and she does not keep that a secret. She definitely admits outright to like figuring out what she wanted and going for it. But also like she was a very sympathetic character at the same time. We could understand her motives, and I found her to be more interesting and like to be more true to life that way. So I feel like the Evelyn Hugo, the titular character, should have been so strong, and I'm glad she was. To me, the biggest letdown of the whole book was the Monique character, who was the journalist. I understood that structurally and narratively that like, and like some of the reveals that happened towards the end of the book, like I understand why the Monique character was needed and why that was a part of the book. But to me, like she was just annoying, and she asked a lot of, in my opinion, stupid questions, and I just didn't really care about her, like what she got out of this story. And so I understood why it had to be in the book sort of as a narrative structure, but like I just didn't like that element. So for me, that just sort of prevented The Seven Husbands from being amazing. And you can hear my full thoughts, more expanded on what I just said, in my review video that is linked down in the description. So go ahead and check that out. The next book that I finished in September was Us by Sarina, Bowen, and Elle Kennedy. This is the second book that is after the sequel to Him, which I read a few months ago. This is a duology. We continue to see the same couple from the book Him, Wes and Jamie. This is a male-male romance. It's a sports romance. Wes and Jamie are in a relationship, but it's pretty much secret because Wes is a professional hockey player and he is not out to his team or publicly. There have not been any professional hockey players who have come out, and so Wes intends to finish out his first year of playing, or first season or whatever, and then like control their own narrative with coming out and being out in the open and declaring that he has a boyfriend. But over the course of this book, the exposure happens and it's revealed, and like they sort of are outed in not their own timeline, and so they have to kind of resolve that. I thought this book was very interesting. There was understandable tension throughout. That was not sort of like the main source of tension. It was a main source of tension, but like the LGBT quality of this book was not the problem in the book. The problem was the two of them working together and trying to make the relationship work. And so like, yes, there were understandable tensions. There was dealing with the, fallout after they were exposed. There was a tiny little bit of like, unacceptance from other people, some, homophobic. I don't remember any homophobic comments, but like there was definitely some feeling that way. But that wasn't the main source of tension in this book. It was a relationship issue that like then they had to resolve. So I appreciated that a lot, and I felt like it kind of resolved itself quite quickly at the end to get from our like third act drama to the final resolution. Was just like, oh, okay, we're done. Okay, everybody's happy, great. So I would have liked that to not be quite so sharp of like a U-turn, but I did really enjoy this book and these characters, and I definitely want to read more by Bowen and Kennedy. So I hope to check out more of the books they've written together. The next book that I finished in September was the 4th volume of the Yona of the Dawn series. The author is Mizuho Kusanagi. I read this digitally. This is the next installment in the series, all about Yona. In this one, Yona and her friends go and find the blue dragon, and it's kind of I wouldn't say sad, but like it's definitely has like a more sad vibe than some of the previous other volumes, and we get to see some of the blue dragon's backstory, but he's definitely an interesting character. And my only sort of complaint is I'm enjoying this series, but like I feel like I could forget pretty easily what has happened if I don't stay with the series. And also I think that like Yona is kind of like too perfect. I felt that way about, what's her name? Toru from Fruits Baskets. Like, I just feel like, if your only characteristic is like, sometimes you're nervous or like you're occasionally clumsy, but like otherwise you're practically perfect in every way, it's just kind of like, eh. But I am continuing to enjoy this series and this installment, and the plot continues, and I can tell that like something big is going to happen once she like gathers all these people that she's looking for together. But like it feels very abrupt for her to have already found 2 people only on volume 4. So I don't know, we'll see how the rest of that series continues. The second to last book that I finished in September was also a reread. I reread Spoiler Alert by Olivia Dade. This is, I listened to it on audio, and I did it because the second book, All the Feels, is coming out, or has come out by this point in October, and I wanted to read it. Or I guess it got pushed back to November. I'm currently reading it, wanted to reread Spoiler Alert so that I could dive right into All the Feels with all that fresh. I do have a Spoiler Alert book review video on my channel, which I'll link up in the cards and down in the description. So check that out if you want my full thoughts on Spoiler Alert. But I enjoyed it just as much this time. It has Marcus and April. There's sort of like a Game of Thrones like element. There's a fan fiction element. There's cosplay elements. There's geekiness happening, but there's also sort of a catfishing element happening. And I again laughed at this book and enjoyed it just as thoroughly the first time through. I was more struck on this read through how like emotionally aware our characters are, and how many healthy discussions happen, and very like good communication is happening throughout this book. And I felt like that was a very strong element and something I quite enjoyed. So check out my book review for sort of my full thoughts on Spoiler Alert. But I listened to the audio this time and really enjoyed this reread. And the last book that I read in September was actually kind of a disappointment for me. This was The Heart Principle by Helen Hoang. This is the 3rd book in the Kiss Quotient series. I read this digitally, and I just was kind of underwhelmed by this book. We follow Anna and Quan, where there is autism rep happening. Anna gets an autism diagnosis, which she finds very helpful in her life. But like there's a lot happening in this book. Like she's having professional issues, she is having relationship issues, she gets this autism diagnosis, she then starts having like family issues where there's care of a family member on like who needs full-time like hospice level care, and like her family doesn't accept her diagnosis or her thoughts on this and doesn't accept her kind of interest in Quan. And so to me, it just like did not succeed as a romance book, which is what I wanted. I could appreciate the autism discussions that were happening. There was a lot of really interesting talks about how Anna was like masking, I think was the term. Yeah, I think it was masking. But like this book deals with some really like heavy topics where, she's trying to accept herself and she's trying to figure out what this diagnosis means for her life. She's trying to take care of her family. She's struggling professionally. She has this whole BS happening with her boyfriend, and then this like new relationship with Quan. So it's just like there's a huge chunk of this book where she is caretaking and this situation is very stressful. And then there's like a time jump towards the end of the book that I really didn't enjoy because we cover a huge expanse of time, and the main character Anna, she's like experiencing autistic burnout, which again I thought it was like an interesting topic to discuss, but like in my romance book it just like didn't work very well for me. It just was like we literally skip like 18 months to 2 years, and she just like kind of summarizes all of that in just a couple of pages. And so I never felt like I got to see good like emotional development between Anna and Quan. I felt like when they had their falling out, it made sense, but also like it didn't make sense how she tried to resolve it. He like forgave her too soon. Quan was amazingly patient. He had his own stuff he was dealing with. He seemed like a pretty different character to what we had seen in book 1 and 2, because he's undergone life changes too. And so I went into this book sort of thinking that Quan was going to be a certain way, and then based on how things started, I thought that she had kind of enough going on with the like professional issues and the because she's a violinist and she's struggling to create music. I thought there was kind of enough going on with that and her new diagnosis and like her family not accepting that diagnosis and her boyfriend being in trouble. And so then for there to be the like this like back half of the book to all be this like intense caretaking and nursing of a family member who was like terminally ill, like it just was like too much happening, and it detracted from the romance. So as a journal fiction book, I don't think it was bad. I thought, like I said, I thought the autistic representation was very interesting to read about. I cannot speak to its accuracy, but it seems pretty accurate because I think it's an Own Voices book. But for me, it just didn't really work as a romance, and I was not particularly interested while I read it. So I had to keep like forcing myself to finish, and then I was like, okay, relieved when I finished the book. So overall, I quite enjoyed my month. My average rating was like a 3.8, which is pretty standard for me. And I felt like I just kind of like ended a little bit right on a bummer, but the first couple books I read in October were good. So that is my September wrap up. If you have read any of these books, please leave a comment down below so that I can further this discussion about these books. And yeah, let me know if you have a recommendation for anything that I said that I really liked. If anybody has an amazing book that they thought was great, that's like gives them red, white, and royal blue vibes, just literally on like tone and construction, I would love a recommendation. So thanks so much for watching this video, and I will talk to you next time. Bye!